Good afternoon. To begin my presentation, I have a few questions to ask you. Would you eat this? It is some pad thai. Would you eat this? It's a black bean burger. And lastly, would you eat this? It's actually from a restaurant in Noda called Oh My Soul that I wanted to include here as a little plug because it's a great local restaurant and I highly recommend it. But this picture is of some fake fried chicken and some french fries. The reason why I asked you how you felt about these foods is because I wanted you the opportunity to gauge how you feel about vegan food options. It's okay if you're a little bit intimidated by them or maybe even grossed out, but my main point is that they are food, and as I move through my presentation, I hope that you feel a little bit more open to these types of foods. My name is Katie Gunzenhauser, and today I'm hoping to persuade you to maybe eat a little bit less meat than you normally do. Ever since watching The Lorax as a 12-year-old girl, I remember feeling completely overwhelmed with my passion for combating climate change and just for the environment in general. Although I'm not currently vegan, I am vegetarian and haven't eaten meat for a little bit over a year. I don't expect everybody to take the commitments that everyone else does, and I definitely don't expect you to go vegetarian. But I do hope by the end of this presentation you feel a little bit less inclined to enjoy a nice steak for dinner tonight. And to be completely honest, it surprises me that not everybody feels the way I do about the environment. All of the other social justice movements that people feel so passionate about in our generation are only going to get worse if climate change continues to persist to be a huge problem for our country. And another point that I want to make is that the politicians who are choosing whether or not we take climate change as a main priority for our country are also the ones who are going to be rich enough to afford basic necessities when they become scarce. To include a little bit more indulgence on my point, I have a political cartoon that has a politician promising it's important that we make plans to adapt to climate change just in case. And it's promising all these people who don't seem like they have, a leg up like he does. He's a rich country. They're a little bit more of a poor country. And in the next one, we see that us, who I kind of imagine this as us because we're the richer countries, building a wall instead of helping out. When climate change gets worse, the rich people are going to be okay, and it's going to be the poor people who suffer. That's a statistical fact because they're going to be the ones who live in flood zones. They're going to be the ones who aren't able to afford food. And I don't have time to convince you of all that quite yet, so I hope that you just give me a chance and believe me in that, because what I'm talking about today is only one aspect of the problem. Due to the impact that food choices have on our body, the world around us, and the mass amount of animals involved, our society will need to move towards a more sustainable diet. My first point brings us to the question, is meat bad for human health? According to an article published by Precision Nutrition, who wanted to see not about the moral ethics of eating meat, but how it actually impacts our body, they established that overall meat eaters have more diseases and an overall unhealthier diet. In conclusion, they decided that they didn't think everybody necessarily needed to go vegan, but they did think it was probably a good idea to cut out processed meats. Like I said, I'm not here to convince you to go vegan or vegetarian either, but to make healthier decisions for you and the world and the animals involved. The World Health Organization also reported a similar statistic. They said that simply eating 50 grams of meat a day, which is equivalent to 2 slices of ham, can increase your risk of cancer by 18%. When I was doing research, I kind of realized that it isn't really clear what impact meat has on the body. We haven't had enough time questioning it for us to really figure it out. But the gist that I got was that cutting out processed foods, especially meats, can save you in the long run. Unfortunately, a lot of people haven't caught on to this idea yet. In the past 50 years, meat consumption has actually doubled globally. And while that's great for countries who don't historically have a lot of sustainable diets and they've gotten the opportunity to feed themselves more, for countries like the United States who hasn't struggled with hunger as much as others, eating more meat isn't necessarily going to solve the problem. And a final note before I move on from talking about human health, I want to talk about how these statistics are run because I think it's important. So using this graph that I have a picture of, I'll bring it closer to the screen. We can see that in 2014, right here, the increase of scientific articles on red meat published per year spiked like crazy. The reason why it spiked so much is because people started calling out the meat industry on some of the cruel things they do and how it's actually impacting their human health. So the meat industry went out and paid a bunch of scientists to give them a little bit more of a leg up on, hey, are we really doing anything bad? And I'm not saying that these articles were necessarily all published by the meat industry or by people with a lot of money, but I think it's important to understand that, of course, the people with money have the resources to get the scientists who maybe would agree with them. A little bit of a conspiracy theory, but I have facts to back it up. While meat can affect us as individuals, the bigger concern is what it's doing for our future generations. I want to discuss in more detail why and how the meat industry is affecting climate change. So let's begin with talking about the meat industry's water usage. In my science course last year, I learned that less than 1% of all of the world's water is fresh water that humans can actually drink. And the more we use, the more likely we have to keep digging into aquifers and other sources of water that aren't replenishable. Your water is coming from somewhere. And in the United States, about 1/3 of all of our water is used to support cattle and other livestock, according to an article published by Nature. And to compare the meat industry with other sources of protein, a ton of beef uses 17,000 metric cubes of water per ton produced, while soybeans, another great source of protein, only uses 3,000 metric cubes of water for every ton. That's a lot of precious water just going towards a burger. Now let's discuss greenhouse gases. It's clear that big industries have a huge impact on greenhouse gases and what's emitted into the atmosphere. But a common misconception is that we can actually blame transportation. A lot of people like to just think it's cars or buses or airplanes that's causing the problem, but transportation actually has a huge competitor in who emits more greenhouse gases, and that competitor is the meat industry. Although I found articles varying who researched what, the meat industry at least emits 15% of all greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. I also found articles that stated that 50% of all greenhouse gases emitted in the United States could be correlated to the meat industry. That's a lot of greenhouse gases. Another huge factor that the meat industry has on people is its land use. Currently, half of the world's habitable land use is used for agriculture, and of that half of it is used specifically for cattle and meats. Utilizing land in a way that minimizes factors on the environment could be a way for us to limit our impact on the world around us. Because of our need for cows currently, that's not really possible. I want to touch upon the other fact that living conditions for animals in the meat industry are simply inexcusable. Small animals are kept in tiny cages while large animals are crowded into small pens. There are millions of animals out there that haven't even seen the light of day today. Many animals die never truly living, and if they can't stand, walk, or produce babies, then they're going to be slaughtered. In addition, a report published by the Pork Industry Institute stated that over 50% of pigs who couldn't walk in 2008 had H1N1. Disease runs rampant in the meat industry. To conclude my speech, I want to remind people to move towards a culture that is more accepting of plant-based diets and less dependent on the meat industry, because it's affecting our health, our environment, and all of the animals involved. I hope that you leave this presentation understanding that the meat industry has a hold on us, so that we depend on their production. But please feel compassionate towards animals in this justice movement. Thank you.